Hey everyone, it's me, Aaron, and welcome back to the Professor Thorgy channel. You know, I love Halloween as much as the next guy, I think that's pretty obvious, but after spending an entire month talking about everything spooky and scary from the world of geekery, it feels good to finally be back to business as usual. It feels good to be back in my old studio. It feels good to finally be done with THORGIWEEN. Now we can get back to reviewing brand new movies, talking about video games. Man, I've got a lot of those to catch up on, doing brand new comic book videos. But before we can get to all of that, I have one piece of business that I have to take care of. You see, there's a loyal fan who has been with this channel throughout all of October, watching every single one of our videos, and I have a very special message for them. Aaron, this is totally a dream. You're still trapped in that hotel.
Hi. You know what? I think I've been spending too much time behind this desk. I'm gonna go for a walk. Maybe check out that hedge maze. Okay. You know what? This actually was a good idea. It feels good to get out of that stuffy hotel and finally get out here and get some fresh air. Plus, this is a really nice hedge maze. I can see why the bartender kept recommending it to me. But you know what? Whether that was a dream or not, the fact of the matter is, the 31 days of THORGIWEEN are finally done. I can't believe that for 31 days we were able to put out a brand new video every single day. So, what do you say we go out with a celebration? What do you say for the final day, to celebrate Halloween, we count down my personal favorite top 31 horror movies of all time. Now for this list, I only have one rule, which is only one movie per franchise. Aside from that, it's just whatever I want to put on the list. So sit back and enjoy my 31 favorite horror films of all time. Which week did I come in?
And number 31 is High Tension, a French slasher film that's all about two friends being hunted down by some mysterious figure. And if you've watched this channel for a while, then you know slasher films don't really do it for me. They're just not really my thing. I'm not really that scared of slasher films. However, I absolutely love the darker tone and the grittiness to how this film is shot, and I really enjoyed the main characters in this movie. So yeah, I was actually invested. I really wanted to make sure that they were going to be okay, but that's not what gets it on this list. What gets it on this list is High Tension has one of the best twists in any horror film I've ever seen, and the twist is absolutely insane. If I just told you what the twist was right here, you'd say that sounds incredibly stupid. But the movie was able to pull it off. When I originally saw this film, that twist blew my mind, even when I knew it was stupid as it was happening. Number 30, Shin Godzilla. Now, I want to come in here and once again just remind everyone that this is the list of my personal favorite horror films, which means it's going to be incredibly subjective. And just like slasher films, yeah, giant kaiju films, they're just not my thing. I think kaijus are really cool, but I never really get that invested in the actual movies themselves. I got invested in Shin Godzilla. Not only is Godzilla absolutely terrifying in this movie, there are moments when it is attacking the city and it feels like the apocalypse given form. You really get that feeling like there is no hope. There is nothing that mankind can do against a creature like this. But I love the message of this film. This entire movie is basically just one giant episode of The West Wing. The message of this film is that, hey man, if mankind comes together, we can actually do incredible things. And this entire film just focuses on all the levels of government in Japan and all around the world and how they actually have to respond in order to come together and fight off a threat like, you know, Godzilla. You actually see step by step every single person in the government having to come together and work with another person in the government, and every single piece of paperwork and every single piece of agreement that has to happen in order for the government to combat Godzilla, but it shows it actually working. As I said, this is actually kind of an uplifting giant monster movie because it is about, hey man, if we actually all sit down and focus, we can do amazing things, and I love that that's what this movie was going for. Number 29, Dog Soldiers. I love werewolves. When I was a kid, they were my favorite monster, but there aren't really a lot of great werewolf movies. They're one of those classic horror movie monsters that was kind of just forgotten about for a while in there. And even when they do come back, you know, they're not exactly what you picture in your head when you think of werewolves. When you're a kid and you're thinking of werewolves, you're thinking of really big, powerful monsters that are incredibly fast and strong and just full of claws and teeth. And yeah, most movies can't really pull that off. Dog Soldiers is about a group of soldiers who get cornered by a pack of werewolves and they have to fend them off in this little tiny cabin, and those werewolves were awesome. But even cooler than the werewolves were the soldiers themselves, who we have to see coming together to fight off these mysterious creatures. At number 28, Dead Alive. Or if you grew up outside of America and outside of the 90s, Brain Dead. I have an interesting history with this film because it's one of those movies that every single weekend when I used to go to Blockbuster throughout my entire youth, I would always see it up there. It would always be in the horror section, but I would look at it and think, yeah, that just kind of looks dumb and gross. And I'm not really interested in either of those things right now. And even when I got older and people kept telling me, no, this thing is actually a masterpiece. This is actually one of the best horror comedies out there. I still avoid it just because, yeah, my memories from when I was a kid of just looking at that box art and just thinking, ew, that doesn't look interesting at all, just kind of prevented me from actually checking this thing out. But a couple years ago, I finally decided to take the plunge, and I'm glad I did because, yeah, those people were right. This is one of the best horror comedies I've ever seen. It's kind of like a Three Stooges movie, just, you know, full of gore and zombies. And also, I really have to give it to the director and the writer behind this film, one of whom actually went on to make the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yeah, that's an interesting little tidbit, but I really have to give it to them because they had no limits on this movie, and that's one of the things that makes it so special. Whenever they had to do a scene where zombies would attack or our heroes had to fight them back, they just decided, you know what, let's just get as nuts as we possibly can. And they pulled that off, and I have to kind of respect them for it. Number 27, Creepshow. Horror anthologies are kind of a weird thing to pull off because you have to be able to balance many different types of scares from many different creators and yet have it all have one cohesive feeling to the entire movie, and Creepshow absolutely nails that. This movie has got great monsters, a great art style to it, great villains, one of whom is played by Leslie Nielsen. You know, the guy from the Naked Gun movies? Who knew he could actually play a villain? Oh my gosh, he nails it in this film. But I think the reason why this movie is so successful, why we keep it in our memory, and why it's one of my favorite horror films is just because they had fun. I think so many horror anthologies out there, they try way too hard to create something brilliant, and this movie just wanted to create something fun. And you know something? They did. Number 26, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, again, I mentioned earlier that I'm not the biggest fan of slasher films, just simply because they don't do it for me. It's not my type of genre. However, Texas Chainsaw Massacre will always hold a special place in my heart. It's not because of how creepy the villains are, it's not because of the gorgeously morbid layout of that house. No, the reason why I will always remember this film is because I actually watched this in college in one of my classes, and as the film was over with, I walked outside and the sun was going down, so there was this bright yellowish orange tinge to everything, and slight spoiler warning, but that's exactly what things look like at the end of this film. At the end of this film, the sun is coming up, so everything has that same orangish glow to it, and I was thinking to myself, you know what? I liked it. It's still a slasher film, so it doesn't quite do it for me, but I can see why people enjoy that film so much. I guess it's pretty good. And then behind me in the parking lot, someone revved up their motorcycle, which sounded just like a chainsaw, and I shrieked out loud and jumped and did a full 360 spin around in the air, and I was prepared to run for my life, and that's when I realized, you know what? Even if this isn't quite my subgenre of horror of choice, this movie had an impact on me, and because of that, I will always consider it one of my favorite horror films. Number 25, 1408. This is such an underrated movie. It's one of those films that got lots of applause from both critics and audiences, but it was kind of just forgotten to the sands of time. It's slowly just being erased from people's memories, and I don't want to see that happen because I love ghost stories. This is a great ghost story. John Cusack plays a guy who has kind of become famous disproving paranormal events, so he wants to research another event that he considers to be a hoax, which is this haunted hotel room. He goes to the hotel, and the manager of the hotel is begging him to not do this, and I love this film instantly. Before they even get to the scares, it's like, alright, I understand this guy, I understand the guy who runs the hotel, and you really kind of root for both of them because, yeah, just like John Cusack, you don't believe this stuff is real, you see where he's coming from, but the guy who runs the hotel, you can instantly tell something is wrong here. But when John Cusack gets inside that room, it becomes very clear not only is the haunting real, but he can't escape. And the way that they just slowly build up that sense of, no, you are here forever. You cannot escape this room. It did a marvelous job of just capturing my attention and never letting go. In fact, that's honestly one of my favorite types of horror films. The type of horror film where our protagonist just can't escape.
There really is something just terrifying about that idea that you're trapped in one spot and something paranormal is just preventing you from leaving, and even when you think you found a way out, it's just a big trick and you're still trapped in that one place. I'm aware of the irony.
Speaking of horror films where you just can't escape, at number 24, Cube. This is one of those films that audiences loved, but the critics absolutely hated it. And I can kind of understand why. It's very weird. This is not your typical horror film. It's not your typical protagonist. It's not your typical setting. But that's all the stuff that I love about this movie. Cube is the story of a group of strangers who just wake up inside of a cube. And they don't know how they got there. But if they can solve a puzzle inside the cube, they can open a door which leads them to another cube. And as the story goes along, they begin to realize, okay, we're just trapped in some giant maze. And the maze is even moving around, so it's not like we can really map this out. As I said, I love a horror film that can put you in a setting that you just flat out cannot escape from. But this film, it didn't just come up with a way to do that in a brand new creative way, it also gave us a cast of characters who we knew nothing about, but as you start to learn more and more about each of them, you became more afraid of them than you did of the room. Number 23, Tucker and Dale versus Evil. I will admit, I have some other horror comedies on this list that are higher than Tucker and Dale versus Evil, simply because I can look at them and say, yeah, in all honesty, they are way better made movies. They've got way better jokes, way better characters, etc. But just speaking in my own personal taste, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil might be my favorite horror comedy of all time. Another absolutely underrated film that I cannot recommend enough to people. This has such a creative twist on the slasher genre. This is a story about a group of college kids going up to the woods for a crazy weekend, but when they get up there, they see these two mountain hill people up there. And they're kind of intimidating, and they're very curious about what they have planned. But then, it cuts to the point of view of these Mountain Hill people, Tucker and Dale, and they're just two good old boys. They're just going up to their cabin to fish for the weekend. That's it. They don't want trouble from anybody. But after one misunderstanding after another, the college kids decide these guys are evil, and they're out here to hunt us down. They're a bunch of slasher monsters. We gotta go and fight them first. And the rest of the movie is these dumb college kids killing themselves off accidentally right in front of Tucker and Dale until Tucker and Dale are convinced this is some kind of a suicide pact, and we gotta stop these crazy kids from killing themselves. It is one of the smartest parodies of a horror film I have ever seen. If you want something to watch on Halloween, but you don't like the big spooky scary movies and you just want to laugh, Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Number 22, The Blob. more specifically the 1988 remake of The Blob. Now, for anybody who's been watching this channel all month long, you saw our Tales from the Vic episode in which we discussed this film, and I honestly had not seen this since I was a movie. I had to rewatch it for that show that we did. I love this movie that much that it instantly jumped up this high on the list. The practical effects in this movie are stunning. All the kills from the Blob will make you realize what a terrifying monster this thing actually is. And all the characters, while yes, being tropes of 80s horror movies, are really darn good tropes of them. There might not be anything that original to these characters, but they're all written and acted incredibly well. And sometimes that's all you need. This to me is one of those definitive horror films of the 80s, and yet so many people forget about, so I had to come in here and make sure to recommend it one last time. Number 21, Stephen King's It. Not that one, no, the new one. This might be the most crowd-pleasing horror film I have ever seen. I saw this in a packed audience, and everyone in there was laughing and applauding and also being terrified. Listen, I really did enjoy this film. It probably would have made it into my top 31 movies of all time list, even if I hadn't have seen it with that crowd. But just seeing how much a horror film could bring not only scares, but absolute joy to that many people. Yeah, honestly, that's the thing that's always gonna stick with me about this movie. Whenever I go back and watch it, that's the thing I'm always going to remember, and just thinking about that alone kind of brings a smile to my face. Number 20, Hellraiser. This is another movie that I spent years just looking at and going, ew, that just looks gross, I don't want any part of that. But eventually I decided, you know what, you can't make judgments about things that you have not seen, so I am going to go ahead and finally watch it. And wow, this might be one of the biggest turnarounds from my preconceived ideas about it versus my actual ideas about it. Because after watching it, I fell absolutely in love with not just this movie, but this entire franchise. However, the first one is always going to hold the biggest spot in my heart because I love what a slow burn this movie is. You look at and you think, okay, there's a dude with pins coming out of his head and chains all around him. Clearly it's going to be some demonic film where these monsters are chasing people down the entire time. No, actually, it's about one of the victims of Pinhead and the Cenobites. And it's about him slowly trying to return back to life by devouring other people, and the woman who he was having an affair with back when he was alive being forced to basically kind of become like a Black Widow spider and just bring people back to her home so that she can get them killed in order to bring her ex-lover back to life. It's a crazy psychological thriller, and I'm honestly stunned that, yeah, they were able to pull something like this off with a concept like, you know, Cenobites who torture people for pleasure. Number 19, The Exorcist. The Exorcist is ranked by many people to be one of the best horror films of all time, and even though it's not even in my personal top 10, speaking objectively, I can absolutely understand that many people putting it that high. It's crazy to me that so many decades after The Exorcist, when we have had so many movies about ghosts or possessions that basically just rip off The Exorcist, still to this day, almost none of them have been able to hold even a candle to the way that this movie did it. This movie is over 4 decades old, and yet the possession of Reagan in this film is still more disturbing than any other possession I've seen, and you just care so much about her and her mother, and especially Father Damien. That was one of the smartest things about this movie, was giving us a priest with such a complex backstory and so many people in his life who you became attached to as well, and you seeing his ups and downs so that when it comes time for the actual exorcism, you are rooting that guy on. Number 18, The Shining.
Gee, who saw this one coming?
Yes, if you've been watching us all month long, it's pretty obvious I'm kind of a fan of this film. However, if you watched our review earlier this month, you know I do still have some problems with it here and there. However, the stunning stunning performance from Jack Nicholson, as well as the actual location itself being one of the best villains of any horror film I've ever seen, despite the fact that it's just a house. Yeah, those two things are able to push it this high on the list. Even with the small little nitpicks that I have about the film here or there, those nitpicks are going to fade from my memory eventually. However, the way that this film is shot to make you scared of every single corner and to make that house feel like it's coming alive, that's stuff that's always going to stick with me. Number 17, Black Swan. Now, I know a lot of people out there might remember Black Swan and think to themselves, that wasn't really a horror film, but I actually would argue that it is a horror film on the grounds that it scared the ever-loving crap out of me. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this film terrified me. It's all about a ballet star who is really messed up after years of psychological abuse and starving herself and working herself half to death. So when she finally gets the opportunity to be the star in Swan Lake, this big production she's been aiming at, only for some random new girl to show up and try and take the role away from her, it causes her to descend into a world of paranoia and psychological torment like I have never seen in a film. There are moments in this film where you see Natalie Portman start to hallucinate about the things that are happening to her and happening around her as she is finally starting to hit her breaking point, and they were so disturbing, they made me cringe and screech in the theater. Black Swan is one of the only horror films that I have gone up to people and told them about how amazing it was, and then told them to never watch it because I knew how much it would mess them up. Number 16, Return of the Living Dead. This is another horror film that we reviewed earlier this month. If you want to check it out, a card should be popping up right now for it. But to quickly summarize, this is a film that was trying to be a horror comedy. And when I saw it as a kid, I just saw the horror. When I got a little bit older, I saw the comedy. And yet when we went back and watched it again this month, I saw the horror all over again. This is basically set in a world in which Night of the Living Dead actually did happen, and the government just kind of covered it up and kept it a secret. But when the zombie outbreak happens again, we discover, yeah, all that stuff that you saw in the movie, that was just made up for the movie. All that stuff about how you can kill a zombie by hitting it in the head or decapitating it, that stuff doesn't actually work. These creatures are tormented. They are starving, and the only way to make that pain go away is to devour human brains. But yes, this is actually where the idea of zombies screaming out brains came from, so there's a fun fact for you. But when I was a kid, I loved zombies, and one of the reasons I loved them was because they had very simple and clearly established rules to them. But this is the film that said, forget those rules. They don't mean anything. All the things you were taught about how to take out a zombie, they don't work. How do you actually take out a zombie? You don't. There is no way to defeat them. And that's one of the things that scared me about so much when I first saw it. But again, as an adult, years and years later, returning to it this month and watching these people struggle to go up against these zombies and seeing their loved ones just screaming out about how much pain they're in, about how they have to eat their own girlfriends in order to make the pain go away, and seeing just rabid mobs of these creatures just screeching out in pain, going up and gobbling everyone that they can find, that kind of terrified me all over again. Number 15, The Fly. More specifically, the 1986 remake of The Fly. All month long, you've heard me talk about all the specific things in horror films that scare me, but one thing that I haven't really brought up is body horror. And I don't mean body horror like, oh, someone's being ripped apart and mutilated and you're seeing their guts, isn't that creepy? No, I always just kind of find that gross and it doesn't really do anything for me. When I say body horror, I mean the idea that your body is transforming into something that isn't human and you have no way of stopping it. And the 1986 remake of The Fly did that better than any horror film I have ever seen. As you watch this poor scientist just slowly transforming into this monster, at first, hey, it's kind of cool. It's almost like a superhero thing. He's getting all these special powers and such. But then he starts vomiting up everything he's trying to eat. His skin starts peeling off. He's turning into this horrifying husk of a creature that he once was. And there's nothing he can do. There's just the slow inevitability approaching that very soon he will not be a human being anymore. He truly will be a monster. That idea that this film plays with, that there's nothing that you can do, you just have to sit back and feel yourself becoming a monster, is scarier than the actual monster itself in almost any horror film I've ever seen. Number 14, if we did Return of the Living Dead, you know eventually we had to get to it, Night of the Living Dead. Honestly, what can I say about this film that everyone hasn't already said before? This movie, it redefined what zombies are. It's the thing that started my fascination with zombies when I was a kid and I was really getting into horror for the first time. The movie is absolutely groundbreaking in its casting and the really heavy message that comes at the end of the film. It didn't just really recreate what zombies are, it actually kind of influenced all future zombie films by playing with that idea that, hey man, maybe the brain-eating monsters outside the door aren't the big threats you need to look out for. Maybe it's the human beings themselves when they're pushed too far. This is stuff that, yeah, these days, it's in everything zombie related, but this was groundbreaking in so many ways for when it was made. And honestly, I think this movie still holds up. A couple of years back, I actually went to a theater on Halloween night and saw this thing with a large audience, and when I walked out of that theater into the Halloween night with the big moon hanging over me, yeah, I kind of got a chill. I kind of got that feeling of, oh man, what if something's just around the corner? And that's exactly what a good horror film should make you think. And it's stunning to me that a movie that we have all seen dozens of times and parodied even more times, and it's so old, was still able to make me feel that. Number 13, Monster Squad. I think I've probably talked about this movie more on this channel than any other horror film I've ever brought up. We've probably brought this up about 3 different times on 3 different THORGIWEENs, but I had to come in here one last time and talk about before the month is over with because, yeah, I can't stress enough how fun Monster Squad is, how it captures that love that kids like me had for monsters when they were growing up, that feeling of kind of being an outsider as a kid because you're into such weird stuff, but finding those friends of yours who turn that into an adventure, and also, it just made these monsters cool. This is one of the best versions of Dracula you'll ever find. This is one of the best versions of Frankenstein you'll ever find. It's easily the best version of the creature from the Black Lagoon you'll ever find. And it's the only film out there that was not afraid to ask the big questions about these monsters that kids have been asking forever. Like, you know, what would happen if you blew a werewolf up? That's the kind of thing that a little kid would ask when they're starting to learn about these monsters and all their weaknesses, and this movie actually played around with that. It also, of course, discussed whether or not Wolfman had nards, which is an important question that we've all been dying to find out the answer to.
He doesn't have nards! Do it! Wolfman's got nards!
But this movie is also loaded with heart. Again, we watched this movie for probably the 3rd or 4th time for THORGIWEEN this month, and it actually started making me cry at the end of it. That's something that almost no other movie on this list was able to do, and again, I've seen this movie more times than I can count, and yet it still has that impact on me. Number 12, Cloverfield. This is one of the best found footage movies I've ever seen because it avoids so many of the mistakes that other found footage movies make. The characters are not all unlikable assholes. They actually have goals and dreams and relationships that you kind of cheer on in the movie. When our protagonist wants to head back into the city when this giant monster is attacking so that he can save his girlfriend, yeah, you want to see him save his girlfriend, especially after learning about everything that just happened the days before leading into this attack. It actually makes you care about them even more. This movie did an amazing job of building up the relationship between 2 characters who you almost never even see together in this film. The movie also had a good reason for having the character constantly bring the camera around because, yeah, do you see the giant monster attacking? Wouldn't you kind of want to document all of this? It actually sort of makes sense. But the most effective thing in this movie to me, the thing that made me love it so much, was that it was able to make me look at New York in a way that I never had before. This is the film about a giant monster attacking the city, And after it did that, I was living in Brooklyn at the time. I left the theater, and I remember just looking out in the direction of the bridge, going into the city, and I, for the first time in my life, actually realized, oh yeah, it's an island. You're kind of just trapped when you're in there. This movie literally changed the way that I looked at a thing I had been living right next door to for an entire year. That's pretty impressive. And the way that this film takes its time introducing the monster is beautiful pacing. You've got a giant creature attacking the city. You can't show it to us all at once, but how do you hide something that big? This film was able to come up with brilliant ways to hide the monster between a giant cloud of smoke, have it just be going around a building as we look at, so that way you got one piece of it here, one piece of it there, so that way you would assemble the creature in your mind as the movie is building it up, leading up to the giant big reveal, which they had happen not at the end of the film, but about at the halfway point, because they realized, yeah, this is the time that people would be getting sick of this. This would be the time that people would say, oh my god, just show it to us already. This movie knew exactly how to handle a big mystery monster. Number 11, Shaun of the Dead. As I said with Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, that might be my personal favorite horror comedy of all time, just simply because the style of humor in there and the characters in there, they speak to me a little bit more. However, objectively speaking, yeah, Shaun of the Dead is the best horror comedy of all time. I will gladly come in here and make that statement. The writing in here is so clever. It's one of those movies that you have to watch multiple times, because every time that you do, you will notice something brand new in the dialogue that makes you go, oh my god, that's a reference to this thing that's going to happen later in the film. It's kind of genius how many callbacks this movie has. And it's directed gorgeously. This is honestly one of the best shot horror films I've ever seen. And again, they weren't just going for horror, they were going for comedy, and they knew how to shoot both those things seamlessly together. The sequence of Shaun having to go to the corner store to get himself a drink, and then later in the film, following the exact same path, but now it's in the zombie apocalypse, and all of it just being one long shot, but you keep seeing things from earlier in the film when he took that walk the first time being referenced in this zombie world. That is one of the most brilliant sequences in any zombie film I have ever seen. The way that this film is shot, the way that this film is written, and the way that the characters are portrayed is so incredibly smart. I could make a video series where I just analyze in every episode 10 minutes of this film, and I would be able to do the entire movie. I would be able to do that for years because there is so much to talk about in this film. Number 10, The Witch. Or The Vivitch. I'm still not entirely sure how I'm supposed to pronounce that. Black Phillip the Movie. Number 10, Black Phillip the Movie. This is probably going to be my most controversial film on this list because people either love this film or hated it, and I, as you can very clearly tell from where it is on the list, absolutely love this film. This entire movie is just about creating despair. This film is about a family in settler times being banished from the town, and they have to build their own new home out in the woods, and guess what else lives in that woods? The Vivitch. And this witch, even though you only see her at the beginning of the film, just spends the rest of this movie slowly tormenting this family and plucking them apart in order to just drive every single one of them mad. And watching as this family crumbles, watching as they just collapse under the weight of not knowing what is out there in the woods and knowing they have no one that they can go to for help and that they're just trapped, almost like a mouse being toyed with by a cat. It just had me on the edge of my seat every single minute of this movie, and it all leads up to an ending that I will not spoil, but there is one line of dialogue that when it gets uttered in this film, I gasped so hard I probably swallowed my own tongue. At number 9, Drag Me to Hell. This is another incredibly underrated movie. It was hailed as Sam Raimi's big return to horror, and after being gone from the genre for so long, he proved, yeah, he still has his chops. This film was beloved by critics and audiences alike, and yet I feel like a lot of people out there have completely forgotten about, so I have to come in here and just talk about how much I love this movie. I'm constantly talking about how I hate horror films that try to make the protagonist kind of jerks, so that way the audience won't feel too bad when bad things happen to them. This movie went the complete opposite route. It gave us a protagonist who was so incredibly likable and so incredibly relatable that it made you care so much about her. This is a woman who has a curse placed on her that will send her to hell in just a matter of days. And why did she get this curse placed on her? Was it because she did something horrible? No, it's because she kind of just did her job. She literally did what her job required her to do, and one of the reasons why she kind of had to do this sort of stern thing at her job was because she had just been nice so many other times. Her boss was kind of looking at her, it's like, yeah, okay, you're a really good employee, but you're way too nice. We need you to kind of be a little bit more forceful here. And the one time that she does what her boss wants, what her job is requiring her to do, it ends up getting her cursed. We have all, at some point in our lives, been in that situation where you did the right thing. You did the thing that you had to do. And you're not a bad person, but you just had to do that one kind of crappy thing because that's what your job requires and you knew it had to be done. And yet, unlike with most of us, this ended up ruining our protagonist's life. So we're all able to relate to that, and we're all able to kind of be terrified as if it was us in that position. This movie did for creepy old ladies what Jaws did for the ocean. And I will not spoil the ending of this film, but I will just say, I don't think any horror movie ending has stuck with me quite like the end of this film did. I walked around for a week after I saw this movie, unable to stop thinking about this ending. It still kinda haunts me to this day, that final image. Number 8, Wreck 2. Now, this one was kind of a hard choice because, as I said, I can only pick one installment from each franchise on here, and the first Wreck is stunning. It is quite possibly the best found footage movie that has ever been made, but Wreck 2 is so creative, and it went in so many brilliant directions with where the story in the first film left off that, yeah, it's the obvious winner to me. I'm not going to repeat too much of my feelings on this simply because we did an entire episode earlier this month on Tales from the Vic talking about why we love this movie. Go and check that out because it's impossible for me to list every single thing that I love about this movie right here, but I will just quickly say it took the idea of the zombie infection breakout that we had seen so many times and it went in a direction that I have never seen before and was actually really gutsy of them, and it absolutely paid off. I love how creative this got with zombies, and in a weird way, this is kind of the Resident Evil movie that I've always been waiting for. Number 7, Train to Busan. This wins the award for horror film that made me cry more than any other horror film, because it's the story of a father who is having trouble connecting with his young daughter, but all she wants to do is go and visit her mother in Busan. So they decide to board a train, but as they're boarding the train, the zombie apocalypse breaks out. Don't you just hate it when that happens? And I've never seen a horror film set on a train before, especially a zombie film set on a train before, but watching this, it makes you realize that's kind of the perfect location for a horror film. There is nothing quite as terrifying as knowing that you're separated from your loved ones and they're in a different train than you are, but between you and your loved ones are a group of zombies. And this film, it goes through all the regular tropes of a horror film, like man is the greatest enemy of them all, and people are getting suspicious of each other, and they're starting to turn on each other, and they're starting to lose ground, they keep getting pushed back and back. However, this film captured that feeling of tension, that feeling of distrust, that feeling of who is the real enemy, and oh my goodness, what could happen to these characters who I have grown so attached to, better than probably any zombie film I have ever seen. And a lot of that has to do with the characters. This film took a group of people who you had never met before, and then by the end of this film, you felt like they were family. Yes, one of the big parts of any zombie film is that you're supposed to feel bad when you see one of your protagonists getting bit and turned into a zombie. I felt my stomach sink when that happened to characters in this film. You like these characters so much that when you see them get attacked, when you see them die, when you see them come back, you feel mortified. You feel like you just actually lost someone who you personally know. This film might possibly be the best zombie film I have ever seen. So of course, they're going to remake it in America. Guys, I'm not entirely opposed to remaking foreign horror films in America, but don't do it with Train to Busan. Have you seen our train system? That thing can't survive the zombie apocalypse. Number 6, Alien. This film takes so many of the elements that I think are important to a horror film, and it masters them. The feeling of being trapped in a location that you can't escape from with some evil monster in there with you. Yeah, Alien set this thing in space, and it made you realize there's no escape in space. That feeling of the unknown, like whatever is attacking you is something that you truly can't understand. The xenomorph is a flat-out monster, and you don't even know why. You find some weird egg thing that you've never seen before. Something that you also have never seen before attaches itself to your face. And then suddenly you're fine until a third thing that you've never seen before is suddenly coming out of your chest. How does this work? How does any of this make sense? Why does it have acid for blood? How did it get so big so quickly? None of that is explained. And that's what makes it so terrifying. But also, just the design of everything in here is so perfect for horror. The xenomorph is unsettling from its long head to its pointy tail. The ship itself almost feels like a dungeon made for torture rather than some advanced science fiction flying spaceship. And I don't know what dark path we're going to go down in the future where our androids have to be powered by... I don't even want to think about what that is, but I don't like it. This movie took what makes horror so disturbing for so many people and almost turned it into a science. Number 5, It Follows. Okay, there is a lot to applaud in this film, so very quickly I will just run down a couple of the basics. Very likable protagonist. Very relatable protagonist. They didn't do anything wrong. They just trusted someone who they shouldn't have trusted. We've all been in that situation before, and of course it ends up ruining their life, and that's a fear that many of us have, so we're instantly able to connect to those protagonists and care about them and hope that they turn out okay. The soundtrack is perfectly eerie. It constantly feels like just fingers are crawling up your back. The setting of Anytown, USA, it kind of makes you feel like this could actually happen anywhere in the world. And of course, the concept behind the monster in this film, that it is some invisible creature that only you can see, and the only way to get rid of it is to have sex with someone, and then it starts chasing them down, and it's going to murder that person, and if it murders that person, it's now going to turn around and start coming back for you, so you're never really done with it. It's never really out of your life. It's something that you're always going to have to worry about, and the only way to get rid of it is kind of just to, metaphorically, screw over someone else. That is something ingenious. It's something incredibly creative and groundbreaking, and also, more importantly, it's the perfect setup to watch these characters who we have come to like and trust and see ourselves in, and watch them slowly devolve into madness as they have to realize, I can save myself, but only by dooming someone else, and it forces you, the audience, to have to wonder, what would I do in that situation? And that's the thing that really gets it this high for me. All that other stuff is great and definitely would have gotten it probably even into the top 10 by itself, but I remember after this film came out and everyone at my job went and saw it, we could not stop talking for weeks about this movie, about, okay, so do you think that this would work? What about this thing? What did you notice this thing in the back? And we just kept coming up with one theory after another about how you could possibly defeat this thing, about what would happen if you did this thing with it. I watched this film years after it came out with my wife, and it was the first time she saw it, and after it was over with, she turned to me and said, hey, did you ever notice this thing in the movie? And I had seen this movie multiple times, and the answer was, no, I did not notice that thing in the movie. That's how much there is to dissect in this film. Brand new people are going to discover brand new things in this movie, and I love it for being able to create those kinds of conversations. Speaking of films that can create conversations, at number 4, Get Out. This may very well be the smartest horror film I have ever seen. I remember before I even saw this film, I heard about how there were college classes teaching entire lectures on just one specific scene after another. And I thought, how on earth can you do that? And then I saw the film and I saw how they were able to masterfully make every single scene have meaning in here. Have every single line of dialogue be something that you could spend a half hour dissecting all by itself. And I realized that is what makes this movie so special. This is a movie that had a lot to say, and it was brilliant in the way that it said it. When I heard that Jordan Peele was going to become the new face of the Twilight Zone, I was instantly on board, because after this movie, if there is anybody out there who I would trust to be able to combine eerie terror with a very heavy message, it's Jordan Peele. Number 3, John Carpenter's The Thing. This is another film that we went back and rewatched this year, and it is stunning to me how I actually like this movie more and more every single time that I watch it. It's a film about a group of scientists trapped in an Antarctic research base who end up getting attacked by some space creature, but it's not a space creature they can even see. It's something small and parasitic, almost the size of a cell, and when it infects someone, it starts to take them over and morph them into something that looks human, but you know it's not. It's just slightly different. At least in the beginning. As the movie goes along, you start to see these slight differences turn into full-blown nightmares. It's one thing to distrust someone and think that they might secretly be a monster. It's another thing to see a giant tentacle come out of their stomach with their own head attached to it, which then falls off and turns into a spider. The creatures in this movie are still some of the most terrifying that I have seen in any film, and the practical effects that they used on them have aged incredibly well. Again, we just watched this film recently this month, and they still hold up for me. But as I have watched this throughout the years, I've come to enjoy this film so much more, and it's not because of the monsters, it's because of the human element. It's because watching this group of survivors slowly turn on each other because they really don't know who could possibly be the thing, that is so much more fascinating to me now than it was when I was a kid. I love the way that they slowly pick this team apart. There are moments in which characters who you thought you could trust, who you thought, okay, they are absolutely a safe bet, this film will make you start second guessing that. It will make you even second guess if the protagonist himself is a monster. And that continues all the way throughout the movie. Up until the final frame of this thing, you're still not entirely sure who you can trust and who really won. Number 2, Cabin in the Woods. This is a horror movie for horror movie fans. It's the basic horror film that we have seen hundreds of times over, about a group of college kids who go up to a cabin in the woods to celebrate for the weekend, and then something goes wrong. However, unlike with most horror films, that is all I can tell you about this film. If you have never seen this movie, if you don't know what the movie's about, stop, go and watch it right now. Do not take the time to look up the trailer, do not look up any reviews, do not look up any discussion about this online. This is a film that you have to go into completely blind, because it is going to shock you almost instantly with the unique twist that this takes on not just the cabin in the woods horror trope, but on all horror tropes. This is a film about taking horror as a genre itself and completely breaking it down. By the end of this film, you could look at it and say, oh my god, every horror film that's ever been made all exists within the same universe. That's the kind of twist that this movie takes on the classic horror trope, and they do it in a way that had me wanting to freeze frame every second of this movie to look for Easter eggs and to go back and listen to lines all over again, because any time that they could throw a treat out there for the horror audience, they took that opportunity, and yet it never once felt like they were stopping the film to just go, hey everyone, fan service. No, it all flowed perfectly in this film. It all made absolute sense in this movie. And at the end, again, not spoiling anything, but I will say when I was sitting in the theater, I was loving this movie, and I thought to myself, you know what? The only thing that this movie is missing is if they just went nuts. They showed me this cool idea. If you could just really go bananas with it at the end, that's the only thing left that I could possibly want. And then the movie, almost as if on cue to hearing me make that request, said, oh, you want to go nuts? We can go nuts. The last act of this film is quite possibly my favorite last act of any horror film I have ever seen. And at number 1, my personal favorite horror film of all time, The Evil Dead. Now I know a lot of people talk about how the sequel is so much better than the original, or how Army of Darkness really made Bruce Campbell a star and really made his character of Ash one of the biggest figures in horror. But if I can be totally honest with you, the original Evil Dead is always going to win out for me. It's always going to be the film that I will go back to as that special thing from this franchise that really had an impact on me. I will admit, a lot of it is just personal. A lot of it is just my own subjective views on horror, just the stuff that personally scares me, but this film nailed that like it was going down a checklist. I am terrified of movies that take place in the woods because that's where I grew up when I was a kid. This movie is set in the woods. This does not feel like it's on some studio backlot and they're just using some woods green screen. When they're out there running around the woods, you feel like they are absolutely trapped out there. You feel like no one can come to save them. You feel like the invisible evil that is hunting them down could be behind every single tree. But also, this film really approached the idea of spirits and ghosts and demons in a way that I had never really seen. I had seen The Exorcist, I had seen plenty of other films where people became possessed, but this film approached the idea of possession almost like a zombie infection. It made it feel like, no, it's not these people going up against one demon that has overtaken one person. Your cabin is surrounded by invisible demons that you can't even see. Or maybe you can see them, but they're so terrifying that we, the audience, can't even begin to comprehend them, so that's why we can't see them. The film plays with that idea so incredibly well, but because it decides to approach the idea of demons and spirits like that, you have no idea who's going to go next, or what they're going to become when they end up becoming possessed. And when they do get possessed, it's so graphic, and it's so brutal, and that's the other thing that made me love The Evil Dead. Yes, all the makeup in here, it doesn't really look real, but that makes it look more terrifying to me. When people become possessed and you see their eyes just light up and you see their skin just turn this weird shade of green, yes, it does look like makeup, but this film is able to get you so immersed in this story and feel like you are trapped there in that cabin with these people who you know, that when you see them turn into that, it doesn't feel like makeup to you. It feels like your friend just turned into some bright-eyed, green-skinned, scaly monster. And seeing how aggressive and playful these demons became when they took over your friends, it made it even more horrifying because that's your sister down there in the cellar. That's your girlfriend out there in the woods. These are your best friends who are also just getting ripped apart and turned into horrifying creatures, but it still kind of looks like them. So when they are just messing with you and just screaming at you, it has that personal connection. Like your loved ones have just been tormented and their souls have been sent to hell. This film is able to capture that feeling so well that it does make you cringe at the very idea of it possibly happening to people that you know, which is exactly what a horror film should do. It should be able to make you immerse yourself and the people you know into this sort of situation. But to me, the thing that makes this my personal favorite horror film of all time is the fact that in an odd way, I kind of romanticize the production of this film. Because when I was a kid, I actually got a book on the making of The Evil Dead, and I was reading about how they put together all these sets, about how they built everything that they had to use in this movie, and it made me realize the people making this film, they were just kids. They were fresh out of film school, and they didn't have a budget, they didn't have all the professional tools, but they went up there to this cabin with whatever they had, and Sam Raimi, the director of this film, he would be looking at a shot, and he would have an idea of what he wanted to do with the shot, but they would not have the appropriate machines in order to do it. So what would he do? He'd just say, all right, get me some lumber, some nails, and a hammer. I'm going to build right here on the spot the device that we need to be able to get this shot. And he would invent brand new machines that he wasn't even taught about in school in order to be able to capture the shots that he needed. They tore that cabin apart. They ripped up so much lumber and constructed so many unique devices in order to get the exact shots that they needed. They took tons of risk on this movie. And again, these were poor kids who just graduated from film school, but they took the risk. They got creative. This to me isn't just my favorite horror film of all time. When it comes to just being passionate about filmmaking, it's also right up there with some of my favorites of all time. I honestly absolutely love all the stories about how they got this movie made. And to me, even though I love Evil Dead 2, even though I love Army of Darkness, that's why this one wins out for me.
And there you have it, everyone. That concludes another THORGIWEEN. I want to thank everybody out there who tuned in for all 31 days of videos. I want to thank everybody who liked and commented and shared these videos all around the web. I gotta tell you, I came to this hotel because I was kind of getting burnt out on YouTube, but seeing the support that you guys have given me all month long, it kind of fills me with energy again. And honestly, if I can somehow find a way out of this stupid hedge maze and make it back to civilization, I swear I'm going to change. I'm not going to complain about working so much on YouTube. I'm not going to drive myself crazy by checking numbers all the time. I'm not going to pull all-nighters trying to get videos out there and just endanger my health by doing that. No, I'm going to relax and enjoy what I have. I'm going to become a better, new, stress-free Professor Thorgy that provides more loving, positive content for everyone out there all around the internet. And if I can just find my way home, I promise on my soul that this is going to be a brand new era for this channel. And that's when I remembered, it's impossible to get lost in a hedge maze. All you gotta do is just walk straight through it. I mean, it's just a bunch of sticks and leaves.
Okay, but what happened to all the money you were supposed to make watching over the hotel?
Oh, right, that. Well, they kind of garnished my wages a little bit, you know, to pay for the damage to the hedge maze. I destroyed like 5 walls of that thing. Weren't you listening?
Did you at least learn your lesson about not being so negative and complaining all the time?
Michelle, my friend, I didn't learn a thing. Happy Halloween, everyone!
Who are you talking to?